morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's great to see you all. I'm Reid Wilson. I'm the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Welcome to the Executive Mansion. In addition to being the residence of the Governor and the First Lady, the mansion is a state historic site, one of 100 locations that we take care of around the state. We manage, enhance, and promote things people love about our state, our rich history, our diverse arts and culture, our spectacular natural areas, and our department tells the story of North Carolina. And we are committed to telling a more inclusive, accurate, and representative set of stories about the people and history of our state. Some is good, some is bad, some is ugly, but we're committed to sharing as many stories as we can. And I think it's essential that we work to uncover and tell as many different stories as possible from as many different perspectives as possible. In that way, we can all have a fuller understanding of how we got to where we are today, how our history has shaped us. And I think that such an understanding of our shared past can only lead to unity and help illuminate a way to a brighter future for all of us in North Carolina. You know, I've been coming to the Mansion Dining Room for about 7 years now for meetings and only learned about the incredible story of the Chandelier just recently. And so we at our department are very eager to share this story more broadly, this inspiring story of the Horowitz family and this beautiful chandelier, so that others can learn from it and take valuable lessons from it. Yesterday evening, just right there, the governor held a menorah lighting ceremony. It was wonderful, and I think it's fitting and appropriate that we are holding today's gathering during the Festival of Lights. We have much to discuss today, so let's start with the magnificent object itself. Please watch this video. Thank you.
Wow. That's stunning. Definitely noticing those beautifully molded grape pendants and the scrolls, and the globe is just really stunning quality at the bottom. It's a beautiful piece. I'm Polly Rollman-Smith, and I'm the Furniture and Decorative Arts Specialist at Brunk Auctions in Asheville, North Carolina. So this is a really good example of a Maria Theresa chandelier. You can definitely tell that it was manufactured in Austria. It's very much in line with a few different Austrian glass makers. I think most people have heard of Swarovski, but there's another maker, a company called J&L Lobmeyer. This is very much in line with their work. It does appear that it was originally electrified. And if that's the case, what's really interesting about this chandelier is that Lobmeyer was one of the first companies to ever make an electrified chandelier. And they actually partnered with Thomas Edison to create the very first electrified chandelier in 1880. So if this is from the late 19th century, this could be among the very first electrified chandeliers ever made, which is really, really neat, especially given all of its other history of donation and provenance. It's quite an incredible story. You know, the fact that the chandelier even survived the war, confiscation of arts, of Jewish arts was, quite prevalent. So it is amazing that this chandelier even survived. These pieces are very fragile. They have hundreds of components to them that would have to be very carefully disassembled and then reassembled. It's quite a delicate and intricate thing to ship, and I'm sure would have been extremely costly for them. So it really speaks to their regard for the state of North Carolina that they wanted to donate it. It's pretty amazing.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank our amazing communications team for the North Carolina Governor's Office. They have grabbed this story like they do so many, but this story has had special meaning particularly at this particular time. And so I'm really grateful for our comms team, Ford and Sadie and Paul and Greg and Jordan and all of the people who've been working so hard. I'm grateful for that. Secretary Wilson, also grateful for your leadership. Our Department of Natural and Cultural Resources celebrates the diversity that we have in North Carolina. We know that our amazing diversity makes us better. There's so many people who try and use our diversity to divide us. And if we constantly head toward the light, if we constantly recognize that our diversity can enrich us and make us better, and that we can learn from the history of so many people who have faced that violence and discrimination over the years and use it to forge a more peaceful future, then that's what we should be doing. But our wonderful First Lady, my wife Kristin, and I welcome you to the executive residence today. This is a special event. Kristin, over the years that we've given many dinners, has told this story of the chandelier. She does it very well and very powerfully, having played the mother of Anne Frank in the play Anne Frank, and having played, having my daughter having played Anne Frank, and that was very powerful. I went almost every performance. It was really special, and she does a very good job. But now we got a lot more details. We have a lot more of a holistic story to tell, so it's really special. As you saw from the video, this chandelier is an exquisite piece that visitors have admired for decades. And for many years, we knew some things about the remarkable history, but in recent months, we came across correspondence from the woman who donated the chandelier, Ms. Karoline Horowitz. And her letters unlocked a whole new world of information that shed new light on the artifact. Yeah, that's a pun, that's a bad one. Through her letters, we were able to make contact with her son, Bob Horowitz, who is here with us today, along with David Horowitz, his son. And he is with us today to share his family's extraordinary story of bravery, of resilience, and of triumph. And so now I am honored to invite Bob to join us here alongside Dr. Patti of Appalachian State University. Dr. Patti is a professor of communications who's affiliated with the University Center for Judaic, Holocaust, and Peace Studies. Dr. Patti specializes in oral history interviews of Holocaust survivors, and he is going to lead our conversation today. So Dr. Patti and Bob, if you guys can come forward. Thank you.
Bob,
Chris?
good to sit down with you formally.
Okay.
That might be the nicest introduction I have ever received. So thank you very much, Governor Cooper. So I'm lucky enough to be here to facilitate this conversation with Bob, and I just wanted to open up with a very few things, some thanks to Secretary Wilson and the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, to Director of External Affairs Sadie Weiner, to Roy Cooper. This is an extraordinary moment and an extraordinary privilege for me. I'm struck watching this video. A chandelier that was made sometime around 1880, one of the first electrified chandeliers ever made. And electrification isn't that old. We're talking 150, 200 years that we've had this. This is the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. The natural resources move really slowly. The cultural resources move very, very quickly. In this work of working with Holocaust survivors, while at Appalachian State, I've had the chance to work with Zohara Boyd and Peter Petschauer. Both of them are retired professors at App State. Peter Petschauer is the son of an SS officer. Zohara Boyd is the daughter of Holocaust survivors who were murdered in Auschwitz. generation later, and the daughter and son, two professors at Appalachian State, spent the last many decades of their life going around North Carolina, talking about just how quickly this can change from one generation to the next, from the son of an SS officer and the daughter of Jews murdered in Auschwitz to two professors traveling North Carolina, spreading the word of compassion and peace. Those are the cultural resources, and they are they move very quickly. We invented electricity about 200 years ago. This was one of the first electrified chandeliers ever, and here we are today. What a miraculous story that takes us here today. So I am Dr. Patti. I'm from Appalachian State University. Thank you for calling me in for this incredible facilitation, and I'm here to talk with Bob and the Horowitz family. So Bob, would you introduce yourself, and then we're going to let your mom introduce herself from a video.
Okay, I'm Bob Horowitz, and I'm very pleased to be here today. I didn't expect to be the center of so much attention, but I must say I'm enjoying it, and I'm a retired lawyer. I don't know how much of an introduction you want, Chris. I'm a retired lawyer and live in California now. I have two children. My daughter was not able to be here today, but my son is with me. And
traveling from all sides of the country, from New York on one side, California on the other side, to be here today. So again, it's just an incredible honor to get to talk with you. We have a number of video clips of Bob's mom, Karoline Horowitz. These are from the Yale University archive, Fortunoff archive interviews that she did 35 years ago, almost to the day, 35 years ago on the 15th. So let's hear from your mom, let her introduce us, and then we'll get back to you telling us some more of these stories.
Today is December 15, 1988. We're in New Haven, Connecticut. Could you please tell us your name?
My name is Karoline Horowitz. I'm really Karoline Charlotte Horowitz.
What is your maiden name?
My maiden name is Carla Strauss.
And where were you born?
I was born in Germany,
What town?
in Wuppertal-Barmen. I gave birth to my son in November of 1937, the 22nd of November 1937, and I was barely out of childbed when my husband came home on the 20th of December of 1937 and said, "Karoline, I've got to talk to you, and it is not pleasant, but don't get upset. We cannot stay here. It's coming to the point where they're going to take everything we have away, and they may be even threatening our lives."
So your mother, you were born into this, Bob.
I was born in Danzig. It was a free city, and it's now the Polish city of Gdansk.
Of Gdansk. But you were really born into the war, and when she's talking about just being off of, after giving birth, that was you that she gave birth to. Would you describe your parents to us? Your mother describes your father as having foresight. I want to know, how can we all have the foresight that your father had to see these changes coming?
Well, I think first you have to be a little bit of a pessimist, which he was, and that helped a lot. He fled a lot. His family fled in World War I. They lived in Krakow, Poland, and they fled from the Russians. Mm-hmm. They didn't take Krakow, but they threatened Krakow. And, he survived a lot. He survived the German inflation of 1923. Mm-hmm. He survived the Depression, and he got away from the Nazis, saw what was happening in Germany, and said, this is dangerous. This could expand.
Yeah. And I know we only have about an hour overall for our conversation today, but we could have 6 hours of conversation. And there's so many details. So we'll just have to hit some of those, some of the highlights. But one of them was just this foresight that your father had, and then the trust that your mother had in him. Was it just his bridge game that won her over, or?
No. No, my father was a serious person. You know, he was well grounded, and he was a very strong person. I think she admired that.
Your grandparents, though, your grandfather couldn't quite believe what your father was saying. They were very established within the community. They had a lot of friends in the community. They couldn't, no, it's going to be okay. Could you describe the difference between them?
My grandfather, my mother's father, was German. Mm-hmm. He was German through and through. His father had served in the Prussian army in the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71. And in 1931, the local paper had a 2-page spread on the 50th anniversary of my grandfather's department store,
right,
and praised everybody to the skies. You know, 5 years later, they'd confiscated the store, taken it away. So he couldn't believe that this was really happening.
Such an established part of the community, established store within the community, just a central part of that. He couldn't fathom that this was what was going to happen. But Pete did, your dad did. Your father was Dutch, is that right?
He was Dutch. He acquired Dutch nationality. They fled after Krakow. They fled first to Brunn in Czechoslovakia, and then they went to. My father's family went to Amsterdam, Rotterdam.
Yeah. In talking with survivors, each story is different, and they go all over the place. Your family's story goes all over the place. At the beginning, though, it sounded like they had as good of an upbringing, as good of a young life before the anti-Semitism became very palpable. It seemed like they had a good...
My mother had a charmed life. She was born into a wealthy family. She had every advantage. You know, all of her stories were of a very happy childhood.
Yep. From a charmed life to being in the thick of the Holocaust, being Jewish in the thick of the Holocaust. There's a few key stories in listening to your mother's testimony through the Yale archive where she starts to sense the anti-Semitism. Some of it was late in high school as she went into college. Can you tell us the story where she was pointed out as the prototype of the Aryan student?
Yeah. My mother, as you may have been able to see from the video, had red hair, blue eyes, fair skin, and she tells a story that she had been playing tennis at one of the universities that she attended in Germany, and there was a Nazi speaker. It was before Hitler came to power, but not very much before. And they said, "Oh, let's go in and listen to the speaker." And they sat in white tennis dress, and pretty much toward the front. And the speaker wound up, a Nazi speaker, and said, "Now I want to show you the prototype of the Aryan woman." And he asked my mother to stand up.
She had a pretty funny response to that. Like this became something she was.
Well, she says that what she said was, "I thank you for the kind words, but I have to tell you that I'm Jewish."
I love that. And pretty active act of resistance in that moment. That was a scary moment. And this was when she could really feel the anti-Semitism was quite real at that point. There are a number of other stories that your mother tells that I would wonder if you would share with us before we get to some of your personal story. Literally being born into the Holocaust, getting separated from your mother at 6 months of age for months at a time. I don't know how anybody deals with that. But before we get to that, there's a few other stories. One of them I have in my notes that's called the coin that didn't flush story.
Oh yeah, that was in 1940. When we left Danzig, we moved to Holland, and
this was running from, and your father sensing the shifts and sensing the danger.
No, the Nazis invaded Holland. My father said, "It's coming, war is coming, and we have to leave." We had a visa for Chile, Santiago de Chile, but we needed a transit visa through Belgium, France, Spain to get to the port in Portugal. And it didn't. Anyway, our first attempt failed. Our second attempt to get out was actually during the invasion itself. We couldn't get on board a ship. The third attempt was we went illegally across the Dutch-Belgian border on foot in October 1940, and my mother had gold coins in her coat, American gold coins. And we were captured by the Nazis. Soldiers came upon us and they said, "You've no right to be here. This is a restricted military territory." And our cover story was, "Oh, we didn't know. We were picnicking. We were just, having a day in the woods." And they took us to another place, and my mother reached into her pocket. She has these gold coins. Well, if you're just going out for a day in the country, you don't have a whole bunch of gold coins with you. So she asked to use the bathroom, and she was shown to the bathroom, and a German soldier was stationed outside. She took the coins out and she stuffed them down the toilet. The toilet wouldn't flush. So she stuffed them down, and probably they were never found, but she was
traumatized.
Traumatized,
terrified.
By that. Yeah.
Thought that this was going to give them away, and it didn't end up amounting to anything. But in these moments of extreme stress, it's interesting what the brain will do and the fear that comes up. But this traumatized her quite a bit, though.
Yeah, I mean, she used to have nightmares about this. She also had she had a muff, and there were coins and jewels and such in the muff, sewn into the lining of the muff. And she had nightmares for years afterwards that she lost the muff. She couldn't find the muff.
That leads perfectly to the lost and found, and what gets lost in these stories and the stuff that ends up somehow miraculously surviving, then ending up at the North Carolina governor's mansion some years later. And we're going to get back to the creative ways that your family was able to hide so many of the possessions in the hand-warming muff, in the diamond in the shoe story we'll tell a little bit later, but just all of the luck, and then with some Jewish survivors that I've spoken with, more than mazel, more than luck, the planning, the strategy, the survival, the resilience that is there. So can you tell us a little bit more about all that your family had to lose during this war, just possessions? It sounded like in your mother's telling of the story multiple times where they had to just get rid of all their possessions, sell their possessions, give possessions to some neighbors, and somehow some of it was able to be salvaged. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, there's a tangible physical stuff. In Holland, there was a Gentile neighbor, very nice people, and my father said, "Look, we're leaving, and we're leaving, and we will give you these possessions." I don't know what they were, furniture, movie projectors, and we'll make a phony sale to you. So it'll be in your name if you could store it under your name.
Your mother said pro forma is, I think, the word she used.
Yeah. And he said, if we survive the war, we'll get in touch with you. If we don't, you keep the stuff. Well, we survived the war, and sure enough, it was there, and they returned it to us.
Do you know if these Gentile neighbors of yours ever made it in Yad Vashem's righteous Gentile list? I would want
I don't think so, because I think you have to do more than that to qualify.
Okay. Still, wasn't an easy time for them to have done that, and to stay in contact with your family. And your family was integrated within the community. They had friends.
Well, yeah, but we were living in Holland. My grandparents were much more integrated.
Okay.
And they also did things. My grandfather was named Gustav Strauss, and they had a very large house with a chandelier hung, and in 1936, they had to break it up into apartments. They kept the first floor and built. And one of their tenants was a woman named Gerda Zeiler, GS, same initials as Gustav Strauss. And she said, "Look, why don't you give me the stuff that has your initials on it? I'll keep it for you. No one's ever going to know that it isn't mine." And so they did that, and that survived.
Again,
I think she had to sell some of it to survive herself in the war.
the foresight, the creativity. By the way, this large estate that was then turned into apartments needed to be turned into apartments because of all the laws that were passed. They could no longer afford to keep up their own house. So this was the house that they had owned for a very long time. They had to break it up into apartments just to continue living there.
Well, to continue living there, once the business was gone, my grandfather's income dropped precipitously, and he needed the money. Also, you weren't allowed to have servants anymore.
Right.
It was a huge house. I mean, it wasn't as big as this, but it was. it was probably half the size anyway.
Yeah.
It was a big house.
Yeah, and still, your grandfather was not able to see the writing on the wall, and your father was able to see that writing on the wall. Can you tell us where your memories begin as a child really born into this, and then, the first 4 years of your life was chaos, was being born into war and genocide? What do you remember?
But, we lived in Holland, and my first memories were of living in a suburb of Amsterdam called Amstelveen. You can get there with a streetcar. And it was suburban, and I do recall being awakened one night by a bombardment. And I don't know whether they were bombing targets in Holland or whether it was the British overflying Holland to get to Germany. But it was loud explosions, and my father, I was crying, and my father took me out and said, "Look, there's planes up there, and these are searchlights."
Wow.
And I was so young, I didn't understand. He said, "The searchlights are looking for the plane." I thought, "What are there men inside the searchlights climbing?" I mean, I didn't understand it.
You were 3 or 4 at the time?
I was only 3.5, 4,
3.5,
something like that.
And still, this is what amazes me. So many of these stories you've heard told to you over your life, and then some of these are the deep memories that that he's still going back to and recalling today. And even as you recall it, you might notice new things coming up as you remember the searchlight. Like I didn't hear that part of the story last time when we spoke over the phone. Something, Bob, that has struck me in working with Holocaust survivors for the last 10 or so years and studying more and more about this are the waves of how do we define a Holocaust survivor and how do we categorize these things. For decades after World War II, it was only somebody who had been in Auschwitz, is only somebody with the number. Historically, that category has gotten bigger and broader, and Governor Cooper talked about the diversity in North Carolina. I'm with you. I think this is one of our greatest resources in the nation and in our state, the diversity that is here. One of those diversities are people, how do we categorize each other? So your story parallels the historical story, and you told me that you've come to begin to understand yourself as a Holocaust survivor. Will you tell us about that? And when you were younger, when have you started to see yourself as among this category of Holocaust survivors?
It wasn't until later. Initially, I thought, well, we're not Holocaust survivors because we were fortunate enough never to have been in a concentration camp. But as I got older, I began to understand that, while I was not in a concentration camp, and neither were my parents, the whole experience of having lived under the Nazis and having fled from the Nazis had left a tremendous impact on me. I mean, it created a kind of a lifelong anxiety. When you learn to be afraid of authority because Germans were in control, that's a hard thing to shake.
Yeah. But in the face of that struggle, that anxiety, being born into that, being separated from your mother for 6 months, your story is one of resilience. You went on to become a successful lawyer and have a lovely family. So in the face of all that struggle and suffering, you still were able to somehow make it.
Yeah, but I had a lot of help.
It takes a village.
My parents were, very supportive, and they were good people, and they valued education, and they wanted me to, succeed, and it all worked out.
So we still have a few more stories from your experience. You were separated from your mother right after you were born for about
Right.
6 months, and you don't. Do you recall being reunited at 6 months old with your mother? You can't.
Anybody
but that's
recall
just,
anything at 6 months old?
I don't know if I've had quite that level of experience, though. That seems like a pretty important time to be with one's mother. What did your mother? What did she tell you about that over the years?
I think it was harder on her than it was on me. You know, I was in the care of my grandparents, and she was in a hotel with my father in Gdynia, Poland, for 3 months he was trying to liquidate the business because the Nazis wanted him in Danzig. And in fact, he told the story that he got a message from the Nazi government in Danzig that they wanted to speak with him. And he sent a message back. He said he'd be delighted to talk to them anytime they want. He's staying at the Hotel Polska Riviera in Gdynia, Poland. And they said, oh, no, that wasn't what we had in mind. We thought you'd come to see us. And that didn't happen.
Yeah. So the whole time, the reason they were separated is because your father's there taking care of the business, figuring out a way out, figuring out.
Well, he had to sell off his inventory and you know.
Do you remember your first experiences with anti-Semitism? Your mother tells stories of you getting kicked out of kindergarten for being
I don't remember
Jewish.
that. It was a nursery school, and apparently she tells a story. I don't remember it. That I came home one day and in tears because I couldn't go back to they weren't letting Jews in the nursery school anymore.
One of the things I learned from your story and listening to these stories is just how fortunate we are today, how fortunate my generation is in many ways. Not to say that there aren't struggles in the world, but how fortunate my students are and just the privileges that we have. Your mother tells the story of, I think this gets at that, of the first time you tried white bread. Would you tell us about this story?
Yeah. You know, the bread got terrible during the war in occupied Holland, and when we got to the south of France, I ate this good French bread, and I apparently said to my mother, "says Could I have another piece of cake?"
You said, "That's delicious. I'd love another piece of that delicious cake." Again, it's all relative, but when white bread tastes like cake, that says something. Yeah. You used to play the harmonica. Your mother ended up hating this.
It was the harmonica was a toy. I never played the harmonica.
Your mother said that this dislike for the harmonica stayed with her for the rest of her life. Was this because it could give you away? What?
We were the way the story is told. We were traveling in a train through occupied France, and for some reason it was important to keep a low profile and not let it be known that we were Dutch or that we were foreigners, that we weren't French. So my father just didn't talk, but he didn't know French. My mother knew some French; she'd studied French, and. So we were in the train, and they didn't talk to each other, and they didn't want me to talk Dutch. They didn't want me to call attention to us. So they gave me a harmonica to play. Every time I started to talk, my mother would shove the harmonica back in my mouth.
I see. Just a few more stories, and we have a couple more video clips to show in just a minute. You faced a lot before the age of 4 years old. Many diseases: whooping cough, diphtheria, measles. Do you recall any of this? How did your parents take care of you while they were taking care of just survival?
Well, you know, I don't remember when I had those diseases. I think mostly in Holland. You know,
it seemed like one after the other.
Well, childhood diseases. I can tell a cute story about the measles. When we came to the United States, my mother and I took a train to California. This was during the war in '44. And I got sick on the train, and it was a long trip, 4 days, 3 nights. It was a long trip across the country. And they got an Army doctor was on the train, and they asked him to examine me, and he turned to my mother and said, "Has he ever had the German measles?" So my mother said, "No, but he's had the Dutch measles."
These stories remind me over and over again just that we are built for struggle, that we can deal with suffering. These stories end up, this chandelier is a work of art, and it reminds me of the art of making do, this highest of human art, the art of suffering well, of dealing with that which we can't control. Along those lines, every one of these stories that I've ever heard, there are so many minor and major miracles, like the minor miracle of all of us sitting in this room today with all that's going on in the world, and the major miracles here. I want to play one last clip, or one more clip. This is the final journey, final harrowing journey to freedom, which has some major and minor miracles in it. The child that she is referring to is this gentleman sitting right next to me in these clips here.
We marched all night. All of a sudden, we came to a place where the men said, "Stop." And we heard very distinctly that there was somebody there. There were two border guards, obviously, who were with patrolling the border. And our guide said to us, "Down." And we fell down on the ground, and this little child lay there, and we all thought we stopped breathing. We heard one German soldier say to the other, "I have heard something there. Listen. Listen carefully. There's somebody here, very close to us. Let's try to get him." But we were so close to them that the flashlight with which they searched the area shone over us. And we were in the small trench just between the guys and the light. Then a French girl came to our rescue. She asked something in French. Ali was one of the soldiers' name. And then Ali said to the other guy, "Well, let's go with her." And we understood the German, certainly. And they walked away. They left the people who they were searching for, and they walked with a girl with a bicycle. And we lay another few minutes, and then we got ourselves up. We were caked with dirt, and we got up, and we walked, and the child did not give a sound. He must have sensed that it was a very tense situation. Got up, we marched a little bit further, and then the guide spoke a little louder, and he said, "Do you see the light back there? That was the last German garrison. We are in Free France."
That silence. Do you think, how can you explain that? I know you might not remember it, maybe you do, but how can you explain it looking back?
I don't know exactly, but I do remember we crossed that border with two members of the French underground called passeurs, smugglers, and three French soldiers who had been prisoners of war and had escaped from a German prison camp. And the men took turns carrying me on their shoulders. It was through fields and woods and so on. And I was 4 and a half. And I remember so distinctly being on the shoulders of those men and knowing absolutely that I had to keep my mouth shut. And, and I looked around to my mother, and I remember at one point I whispered, "Mama, Mama." That was it. And I don't know, it was 4 or 5 hours. I think we left at 10 p.m. and arrived at the other side around 3 in the morning. I don't think I said anything. I remember being absolutely sure that I had to be very, very quiet.
Yeah.
They couldn't convince me of that on the train. They needed a harmonica.
that image of y'all in the trenches, and the Germans are so close that the flashlight is shining over you is quite incredible. So you make it to Free France. From there, more issues of visas and paperwork and trying to, your mother said, the world was pretty well nailed shut. What are the lessons for today as we deal with more and more, global things? How difficult it was for refugees, for people under the threat of violence to try to find a place of refuge. So you end up in Spain, and there's 120 refugees there, all working together to try to, and we just have a couple more stories here, to try to get you out of there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know the precise details, but there were roughly 120 people, Dutch people, not all of them Jews. There were some Christians. And the Dutch government in exile finally arranged for us to go to the Dutch colony of Suriname, which is, it's called Suriname now, it was Dutch Guiana then. It's on the northern coast of South America. And that wasn't easy because, it was a small, very poor colony, and there were no accommodations. They built a refugee camp to receive us. Anyway, the Dutch government in exile in London arranged that, and we took a Portuguese ship and went to South America.
And eventually, when you make it to Dutch Guiana, the compassion of strangers, the compassion of others, there's a family there that becomes a family with you.
That's the story that makes me cry.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. We were put in this refugee camp, and there was a dormitory for men, a dormitory for women, a dormitory for children, and there was nowhere to live. You could. My father had some money. He had deposited, I think, 35,000 guilders with the American Express Company in September of 1939, right after the war started, and said, I want this translated, converted to dollars, and transferred to New York. And so money was available, but there was nothing to spend it on. There was no housing. So my father was invited, my parents were invited to a bridge club. They played with two brothers, and one of them said, you'll come to our house for dinner, we'll play bridge, blah, blah, blah. And they did 3 or 4 times, and at the end of maybe the 3rd or 4th time, the guy said, we've been very fortunate here. We've been safe in Suriname. We've had no children to send to war, and we have 2 empty rooms in the top of our house, on the 3rd floor of our house, that we don't use for anything, and we would like to invite you and your family to come and stay with us for the duration of the war. So then, there was my father, being my father, said, can't possibly do that, and negotiations went on, and he said, okay, but we have to pay rent. No rent. Anyway, so we lived, and we became, the cute part is, the first day we moved in, they said, you must come and have dinner with us this evening. And my father, never wanting to impose on anybody, said, okay, yes, it would be rude of us not to have dinner with you, but, and we'd love to, but this should not become a habit. It should not be a precedent. Well, we had every meal with them for the next for the next 12 months,
and became like family with this family, and intergenerationally to this day, there are still these connections.
Their daughter, incidentally, lives in Raleigh now. She's 91 years old. I'm going to see her this afternoon.
It's incredible. With these stories of so much that is lost and destroyed and so much trauma, there's also, and the worst of humanity, there's also always these stories of the best of us and what we can do and how we can survive and how we can make do. And this family, I think, is a real testament to that. So I just have one more little story before we get to your immigration to the U.S. and we kind of wrap this up, and we're going to give your mom the last word and how to, what do we do with this? Why do we share the story? The last one I have is another little metaphor, and it's this diamond in the shoe story. Would you tell us that one?
Well, you know, when we couldn't legally get to Chile in 1940, before the German invasion, the only way to get out was illegally. And you had to have money and you had to have papers. And my father, this will take a minute, my father went to a shoemaker. My mother had a large diamond that her mother had given. It was like a 6.5 carat diamond. It was a big rock. And my father had the shoemaker make a compartment in the heel of one of her shoes to keep the shoe. He also went to a shoemaker, the same shoemaker, taught him to, made a double lining in one of the suitcases in which he could keep dollars, taught him how to sew it up and unsew it. And you had to check these people out first to see if they were reliable, you know, but so that's the way they travel. Stuff in the muff, stuff in the suitcase, stuff in the shoe. And when we got to Portugal, there's one story. We got to the south of France, to Nice, and my grandparents were living in Nice. They had left Belgium and gone to Nice. And we lived there for a long time, several months, because we couldn't get out, couldn't get to any place else. And one day my mother comes in and looks for the shoes, and she doesn't find them. And she, what happened? Where's the shoe? So she went, my grandmother said, oh, they were worn down at the heel. And I took them to the shoemaker. So they ran to the shoemaker, and the shoemaker hadn't started it yet, you know. So well enough. And then, you know, a few months later, we were in Lisbon, and my father needed money. For some reason, he couldn't get at the money that was in New York. I don't know why. But anyway, he needed money, and they sold the diamond, and they got money for the passage to Paramaribo.
Yeah, just miraculous. I'm glad they found the shoe in time. A theme of these stories, and I'm just realizing it again, your parents met because of Pete, your dad's bridge game. He was pretty good at bridge.
Yeah.
Your dad and this family in Dutch Guiana, it was the bridge connection. And just as a personal note, I know you're about to go on a cruise that is a bridge-centric cruise. So this is another one of these threads that brings it somehow past and present, puts it all in perspective. So we're here today because your family, decades ago, this chandelier survived. Tell us about the chandelier. I know it lived in a basement in Asheville for many years. How did you all find it? How did it make it there? How did it end up here?
Chris, I don't have the details exactly of how it survived in Germany. You know, I think it's continued staying in the house in Germany. The house was not bombed. The house survived, and my mother and her brothers, you know, took title to it. The chandelier was sent to us sometime in the 1950s, don't know exactly. It was such a big thing. You know, we had a nice house in Asheville, but...
Can you tell us about emigration first? What year you all came to North Carolina? I know your mother said she hadn't heard of North Carolina.
Well, she heard of North Carolina. She couldn't believe that there was a city called Chattanooga.
She refused. She said that's not a real word. That cannot be how it's spelled.
We were stuck in Paramaribo, and it was difficult. You know, my father didn't work. He had no job. He finally got a job at Alcoa, but the bookkeeping was in English. And he said, you know, after a week or two, he said, look, I can't do it. I mean, anyway, my uncle, one of my mother's brothers was in the Army in the United States, and he was in basic training in Fort Knox. And in the course of that training, he got some kind of a medal for whatever, marksmanship, neatest man in his barracks, whatever, I don't know. And he got an interview. The commanding general awarded him the medal. So they started to chat. He said, you know, I hear you have a foreign accent. Where are you from? He told him all. I said, well, where's your family? I have a brother in Holland. I don't know what's become of him. I have a sister and her family in Dutch Guiana. And the general, in what was typical American enthusiasm and self-assuredness, said, well, my God, man, why don't you bring your sister and your family over here? He said, well, we've been trying to do that, you know, for months. He said, well, do you think a letter of recommendation from me might help? He said, absolutely. So he said, you come back here day after tomorrow, and my clerk will have that for you. So he came back 2 days later and goes, oh, that letter to the State Department, yeah, that went out yesterday. 4 weeks later, we had the visa, and 8 weeks later, we were in the United States. It was remarkable.
And this was after months and months of him soliciting, and then years of your father back in
Oh, we tried everything. We
everything.
tried Cuba, we tried Jamaica, we tried Liberia, we tried Chile.
The right paperwork, the right recommendation, that one general recognizing, hey, I can tell that you weren't born here. That one conversation making the difference of getting your family to come to North Carolina.
We would have been here eventually anyway, but it might have been 2, 3, 4 years later.
And is it right that you were one of the first Jewish families in this part of, I guess the fourth is what you said?
Well, that's a funny story, actually. In Murphy, when we came, there were 4 Jewish families. 3 of them were all in the lumber business. The 3 of the families were foreigners, were Jewish refugees, and people had no familiarity with Jews, and they thought that people who spoke with an accent were speaking Jewish. He said, a cab driver came to my father's office once, said, somebody here call for a cab? He said, well, no. He said, well, a fella was talking Jewish to me. It must have been here.
How did they think to donate the chandelier?
Well, I think we had a neighbor in Murphy, very lovely people, and their son and I were lifelong friends. And they said, you know, why don't, you know, you're sitting there doing nothing, why don't you give it away, make a donation someplace? And they thought, you know, maybe the state of North Carolina would like it. And I thought, you know, we've lived, you know, North Carolina has treated us well. We came as refugees and made it our home, and we're part of the community. And sure. So our state rep got in touch with whoever needed to be gotten in touch with, and that's how it happened.
And your family, just like so many of the Holocaust survivors that I've spoken with, became very patriotic Americans. This you know, patriotic about North Carolina, patriotic about this country that gave them a place.
No one more zealous than a convert.
So once you emigrated, once your family emigrated, that's when you learned about the destruction, or the scope of the destruction and the murder of your grandparents and extended family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something that strikes me as a way to, as we start to wrap this up, I want to let your mom have some of the last word here.
She'd like that.
This was part of the point. I respect, I don't know how anybody processes any of this, and there's a million ways to do it, so I respect all the different ways that people do it. Your mother was, talked about the importance of speaking, the importance of telling the story. Your father was more pragmatic, just trying to move on and trying to live the life that he lived. I respect both of those. Can you talk about their different perspectives?
Well, at the risk of being somewhat repetitious, my father was, he'd had a hard life, and he didn't expect it to be easy. And my mother had an easy life, and she expected it to be easy, and she was really surprised when it turned out to be really, really hard.
Where do you sit on the to tell or not to tell today? I mean, you're sitting in the hot seat right now, so.
To tell or not to tell?
Yeah, speaking about why did you feel called to tell this story today, to make the trip across the country to share this?
Sadie.
She's quite persuasive, yeah.
Well, I thought, at first I thought, well, this is a long trip, for Chandelier. I mean, it just, and then as I began to talk to Sadie and I thought about it more, I said, this would be really interesting. And it turns out it's been just great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sadie didn't have to be too persuasive with me. She called and I said, when do you need me there? No more questions from me. I wanted to see before we close this up, if we could have your mother, these were some of her final words in her Yale interview 35 years ago.
One day, I think my children, my grandchildren specifically, will want to know what actually happened. Where it's their family, it's their roots, and they will want to know, why did we never know our grandparents better? But it's important. I'm just trying to see, how much do they know about the Holocaust? What do American children really hear and learn, or how are they being prepared for it? Or is it better to let them stay ignorant? I feel that they must know. And I'm sure there'll be a time when he says, what was it all about?
Sure.
What part did my family play
Sure.
in there? And we were right in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing to read a history book and learn
right.
history that way, and it's another one to live through history, and we lived through it. We were in the very thick of it.
And I think in many ways, we're in the thick of it again. As a human culture, as a human species, we're always in the thick of it. Natural resources take millions of years to change. Human cultural resources are changing all the time. What this means is we're always on the crux between enlightenment on one side and genocide on the other. And we're never very far from either of those, historically and right now at this moment. And this is what this brings back for me. I have the honor of leading some dialogues on campus at Appalachian State with a number of the Jewish students on campus about anti-Semitism. The dynamic of these dialogues has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, just 2 years ago, it was able to be an open room forum, 300 people, community members, everybody talking, and it was a beautiful situation. Fast forward just a couple of semesters, and now it is invite only, police at the door, searching bags and all. This is just in a couple of years we've watched these dynamics change. So the past is connected to the present. This Chandelier and Bob, your story is synecdochic and metonomic. It's symbolic for all the ways that we are interconnected and how the past is always interconnected with the present. Bob, we get to sit here with you and talk about this. It's been an absolute honor. So I'm with everybody who says we need to talk about this, and ignorance is definitely not the answer. So thank you for this enlightenment for us. Would you? Is there anything else that you would like to say, having been in the thick of it? And yeah, thank you for your time, Bob.
Well, thank you. I think I've talked enough, frankly.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you so
Very
much.
nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Well, how enlightening. Bob, you get to stand up here. 1 minute.
It's not over yet.
Not over yet. Not over yet. One more thing. Dr. Patti, thank you for that very informative discussion that you and Bob had. And thanks to your mom. And thanks to all of the people who care about preserving our history so that we can learn from it. This is a special day, particularly considering what has happened over the last few weeks. And I think that it is amazing that we now have this story. And last night, you and I were talking about you growing up in Western North Carolina and about how your parents did want to do something to thank the people of North Carolina and thank the people of the United States. And as I think about this chandelier, not only does it produce its own light, it also illuminates the light surrounding it. And as we lit the menorah last night, it was amazing to think about how we can all come together, celebrate, and find the light even in the darkness. And when you think about this historic site, there are hundreds of school groups who come through here. And they will hear a docent talk about that chandelier. And they will hear a docent talk about the Holocaust. I'm truly grateful for the Holocaust Council in North Carolina that has worked to get the curriculum in school. I think more than ever, we need to know about these lessons and the rise of anti-Semitism, also Islamophobia, racism, really understanding about our past. And as these school children go through and they can hear about this horror that occurred, they hopefully can take those lessons from today and use them in their everyday lives as they approach other people. So we are grateful for this chandelier. We'll remember your parents, the Horowitzes. We'll remember you and David and your family. We will remember your grandparents, Selma and Gustav Strauss. And we will remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. But we'll also think about the future and the light that it can bring. We also want you to remember us. So, Kristin and I have put in a frame here a letter on behalf of the people of North Carolina and a picture of this wonderful chandelier that we want to present to you.
I don't know how
today.
you're getting it back on the plane.
No, we're going to ship it. We're going to ship it. We're going to ship it to you.
Because it won't fit in the shoe.
Anyway, let's give that to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. I was worried about the practical things.
We very much enjoyed getting a chance to meet you.
Well,
And
it was
grateful.
a pleasure and an honor, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Thank you. And let's give Sadie Weiner a big hand. Fantastic job. Now everyone can enjoy refreshments and each other. We're glad you were here.
Chandelier.
And look at the chandelier.
Thank you again, guys. It was just
Now,
wonderful.